Fabric analytics platform, and also your Medallion architecture, and all of them sort of tie together, even though they're quite sort of disparate concepts. And we'll talk about all of those as we go along. Before we start, I was just going to show you, I've got a great copy of this book, and we'll talk about it later. But if you're interested in data mesh, I would definitely recommend getting this book. And I've got to admit, I haven't read a physical book in a very long time, and I've actually thoroughly enjoyed it, because you don't feel like you're on the device, and you sort of sneer at other people when you're like sitting on the couch and reading an actual book and not sitting with your nose buried in your phone. It's actually quite cool. So I would strongly recommend it. And the nice thing is, once you're done, you can sort of put it in a sort of a communal work library or something like that. I recommend don't shove it into a cupboard and let it gather dust. Let's make use of these books, because they're great, and it's been very good so far. So yeah, let me share my screen, and then let's jump onto this. Okay, so just let me know when you can see my screen there. It should be good. Can you guys see? Okay, great. Yeah, so while we're chatting, I think, Nick, it's a fairly informal setting. So if anyone wants to ask a question, just put up a hand, stop me, let's ask a question. And what's actually happened in the last, okay, not so much the Joburg talk, but when I did this similar talk in Durban, it became an actual almost panel discussion where I had the entire audience, and like half of them were fighting for data mesh, and the other half were saying, I don't know if this really works. And I think eventually we all agreed that the answer is it depends, as to whether you want to implement something like this or not. But I think the takeaway that I got from it is people also saying, you know what, I can use little bits of the concept that work for me, and I'll take what's useful and I'll put it into practice, and I'll discard what I don't need. But obviously there are certain fundamentals and principles that we're going to talk about, that if you are going to run a true data mesh in the sense of a data mesh, you probably want to implement those as closely as possible. But we'll talk about that, and we'll go through it. And if you've got any questions, please just give me a shout. All right, I'm going to be sipping a coffee here because I'm trying to keep the phlegm nice and loose in my throat there, so I don't have to cough the whole time. All right, so sort of hide this little taskbar at the top of this thing, always irritates me. Okay, slideshow, and from the beginning. Okay, are you guys seeing the actual slideshow, or is it still the?
It's the editor mode.
Okay, let me switch my screen quickly, because it always does this to me. Or actually, in fact, I'm just going to unplug that screen and it should jump across. Let's check. Are we across yet? Are you seeing?
Power BI desktop. There we go.
All right, cool. That's much easier.
Good to go.
Right, cool. So that's intro done. All right. So we spoke a little bit earlier, and I just said, what is data mesh? And I spoke about that book. And data mesh as a concept, I think, has been around for a little bit longer than this. But the first time it was actually sort of coined in terms of what a data mesh is, and used with this exact naming terminology, was by a lady by the name of Zhamak Dangani. You can see her there on the left-hand side. And she's working or at the time, she was working for a company called ThoughtWorks. I think she now runs her own setup. And then she just took this concept and ran with it, and eventually wrote this data mesh book. As of now, there's a lot of companies that have implemented this fairly successfully, large corporations. And it's not, I don't think it's the way you have to go, but if you're looking for an alternative to what we've always done, this is definitely an option. And right now, I'm actually following a LinkedIn page, and there's a data mesh convention happening at the moment, Data Mesh Live. So it's getting a following, and people are saying it makes sense. So I'm kind of running with that. And I haven't implemented a full data mesh yet, but I've definitely implemented certain of the principles. So when you ask the question, what is a data mesh? Zhamak has actually said, and this is her exact wording, And I'm going to read it verbatim because we're going to basically dissect it afterwards. But data mesh is the decentralized socio-technical approach to share and access and manage analytical data in complex and large-scale environments within or across organizations. So let's break that down a little bit into the different components. So the first thing, the first key component here is decentralized. Now, also want you to expand your mind a little bit and think about this not only from data mesh being a concept. And remember, data mesh is not a product. It's not something you install as an add-on. It's not something you put on a machine. It's almost like, for example, when everyone started going agile, and I'll never forget a friend of mine was contracted to go into one of the governmental departments and basically help them adopt this agile methodology. And he came and he arrived, and they pointed him to a computer in the corner. So, can you install it there, please? And obviously, it's not that. It's actually a methodology, and it's something that you almost adopt on an organizational level. And it's quite a difficult thing. That was one of the parts that we discussed in depth at the Durban meetup was, is this something that you can maybe implement part by part or department by department, or do you have to go Big Bang Theory? And there really is no fixed answer. But what I'd recommend, and this is where we come in as data professionals, is you have to decide what is the best way that we can do something like this or implement something like this and have the most effect. So sort of the biggest return on investment for the least effort, sort of using your 80-20 Pareto principle. And I think it also depends on what kind of project you're doing. If it's a brownfields project and you've got the lay of the land and you're about to kind of plant seed, that's great. If it's a greenfields project, you might want to take a little bit more of a stepped approach and just implement it maybe a department by department or through a management team, something like that. But essentially, we're also thinking about this from a point of view that we've got Fabric. And now the biggest thing about Fabric is it's a centralized solution. So we're saying, well, we're taking this decentralized concept, and now I'm talking about marrying it to a centralized solution. We'll get onto that a little bit later because the two are they're very different. They're on opposite ends of the spectrum. But I believe this is why it also just marries together so well. So ultimately, one of the key points here is your data management doesn't rely on a single centralized authority. Now, traditionally, what's happened in our sort of data spaces, and this is the way I was sort of taught as well, is we're going to grab all the data sources from all over the organization. We're going to amalgamate them into a massive database or even a data lake or into a data warehouse. And then one central team, my sort of IT or my data team is now going to handle all this data. And what eventually happens is we land up in a situation where there's this team of professionals who know the tech stack, but don't actually know the data. So they're dealing with unknown data in an unknown format for unknown business processes in unknown capacity, and they don't even know who the end users are. Now what we're doing is we're saying, the business is giving the requirements saying, well, we need to be able to deliver on certain key metrics, and we want you to design and model these metrics and then bring it up so we can visualize it in Power BI. And ultimately what eventually happens is we reach a plateau where the effort that the team is putting in is no longer converting into return on investment on your on your data landscape. What's actually happening is they become the bottleneck in your organization because they are your IT team, your centralized IT department is now dealing with all of these sort of queries that they're all coming into them. And what eventually happens is that they're no longer a master of anything. They're a jack of all trades and a master of none. So at least what the data mesh does is your IT department or your tech specialists are still in charge of the tech, and they're still making sure that they provision as best an environment for you. And I think with the cloud, that entire scope is a conversation its own. It's changed. But what's happening now is we're actually saying, well, the data management, the responsibility actually lies within those various realms. And what we start talking about is a concept called domains. We'll get into the domains a little bit later and what the domains are. But I think that's maybe something to just start opening your mind towards. So these teams within organizations are going to take absolute responsibility for their own data. It's almost something that you want to be proud of them. So this is where we said it's going to contrast with your traditional methods where all your analytical data is controlled by a centralized data team. We speak about a socio-technical approach. So this really highlights the balance between your people, culture, and collaboration, which is your social aspect, and then your technology, tools, and architecture, which is your technical aspect. When we're saying collaboration, almost a federation, we're talking about different organizational units all working together to an exponential power and not sort of working against each other. It's definitely not just about implementing new software systems. Like we said, it's a methodology and it's a mindset. And the final point on this slide is Jean-Marc basically said it's about fostering a culture and processes that encourage efficient and responsible data sharing. Get that off my screen. Okay. And then we're talking about share, access, and manage. So what's traditionally happened as well is when we've had a data warehouse or a database or even a data lake, the sort of approach has been grab everything. The more we have, the better. And what eventually happens is we don't really use it. So it all sits in a data lake, which ultimately sort of becomes a data swamp. And I think we've all seen it happen. And I think the biggest metric that I've learned sort of as I've become more involved in maybe the visualization side of data is we can only judge our success by the adoption from our end users of our reports and our dashboards and things like that. And that's something that Niku has always been very, very focused on his side. And when I was lucky enough to work with him, he sort of drove home that point. And it's a great thing. So what we're trying to do here is data mesh is not talking about visualization, but I think the concept is the same. Our core goal is to make our analytical data more accessible and more usable by your various stakeholders within the organization or even across multiple organizations. Now, how do we do this? We're going to do it through a concept called data as a product. So it's actually a data product. So when we're talking about that, your end user's data is also we're referring to metrics, reports, dashboards, insights, but all of that's going to be powered by your data product. And that data product, like we said, is going to be actually looked after by your specialist data teams. That's decentralized. So what we're saying is we don't want people data is no longer looking at something to collect. It's actually something to share and be proud of. And that's what we're really trying to do. We also then talked about complex and large scale, and I think the reason why they do this is because I think this problem really lies with your bigger organizations where there are a lot of very disparate departments. So let's say, for example, a logistics company would have a sort of a client retention unit and a logistic, the operations unit, and then the exco, and then maybe a sales unit. Whereas a smaller organization might not face these challenges, at least not initially they won't. But I think if we build with these core concepts at heart, we'll never have to face these issues. Or at least if we, because I think a lot of us have existing data landscapes, but maybe future-proof your data landscape as we changing things now and build them with sort of these concepts in mind. But we want to try avoid falling into the pitfalls where the traditional models have fallen over. So it definitely is probably more geared towards a larger company. And this is why the data mesh methodology came into being. And the concept's going to align with encouraging autonomy and scalability in managing your analytical data. So why do we want that autonomy and scalability? Well, the autonomy is basically we're looking at once we've provided the data product, we actually want our citizen developers to be able to grab the data themselves in maybe a self-service manner. Using the tooling that they feel most comfortable with or their native tooling. And the scalability side, look, I believe that everything we build should have scalability in mind because we want to be able to scale with the business. You almost want to encourage growth. And generally what happens is when growth happens, the business side celebrates and the IT department cringes. We don't really want that, we want to all celebrate the wins. And growth really is a win. We should be embracing change. And you'll see that is one of the things here that we're going to talk about now. There's various outcomes or objectives that we want to see happen when we implement data mesh methodology, or at least even the principles behind data mesh. So the first outcome we want to see is we always want to see that we're responding gracefully to change. I would go as far as saying you actually want to embrace that change. Oh, there's someone joining us. All right, Tina says join us. Hi, Tina, how are you doing?
Hi, Ron. Apologies.
No, don't stress, not a problem. We just we're talking about data mesh as a concept. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all. We've just really touched on the sort of the intro to data mesh and what we're going to talk about tonight. And now we're just going on to the what are the outcomes or the objectives of a data mesh.
Thank you, sir.
Cool. Yeah, if you need to ask any questions at any point, just feel free to stop us. Just ask the question, go for it. It's a very informal setting. I'm happy to take the questions as we go along.
Will do.
Right. So first outcome or objective of the data mesh, as we said, we want to respond gracefully to change. We actually want to take it a step further and embrace change. And traditionally, the IT departments have always sort of cringed where there's change or there's growth in a company. We want them to actually embrace it, but we also want the data product teams, the guys who are responsible for the data product, to sort of want this change to happen. And once they see the benefit of a data mesh and how quickly we can get changes out to the business, they'll probably start embracing it even further. We also want to sustain agility in the face of growth. So like we spoke before, where you reach that return on investment plateau, where your business is grown to a point, and because the influx of calls that are coming into a centralized data team just gets so much that they become the bottleneck, that'll no longer happen anymore because your actual various data product teams or the responsible people looking after the data products are going to be able to handle those. They'll be responsible at the end of the day for those data products. So they'll make sure that the growth happens and that we don't get stuck. Almost think of them as like Scrum Masters. They're removing blockers. And then the other one is just increasing the ratio of value from data to investment. So we spoke about that plateau that we want to try to avoid. And if you do implement these data mesh principles, you will definitely see that you'll just continue increasing that ratio of value. So that's what we really want to try to do. And like I said, we really don't want to hold the data anymore and sort of keep it and store it. We actually want to almost serve the data as a product. So there's 4 core principles around data mesh. There's domain ownership, data as a product, a self-serve data platform, and a federated computational governance. Each one actually speaks to the next one, or they all speak to each other. But you'll see there are certain arrows here. Can you guys see the arrows? Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
So the direction of the arrows are actually showing you the dependencies of one principle to another. So when we implement from one principle, we're actually creating the challenge that the next principle is going to address. So if we take a look, and let's just start from the very top, the challenge is the arrow. So the challenge of domain-oriented ownership is actually that we want to use it to prevent data siloing. And how do we do that? Well, we answer it by using data as a product. Sorry, I'm just looking at the numbers here. Yeah, okay, cool. Domain-oriented ownership also, we want to also increase engagement, reduce domain isolation. How do we do that? We introduce a principle called federated computational governance. The federated computational governance, let's talk about that quickly, though we will jump into, is really, let me just double check my slides here. Okay, let's just chat about it now because I don't think I do go into it. So federated computational governance is really the governance around the data mesh, because there still has to be some form of governance, even though this is largely a self-serve model, and because all of these different data products are operating autonomously, there's 2 levels of governance we're going to have. One would be actually at a data product level, and those guidelines will be determined by the federated computational governance team. Now, that federated computational governance team consists of each one of your key members, your data product owners. All of them basically form like a whatever you want to call it, a champions board or a cab or whatever, and they're going to decide on, okay, what are the basic rules around these data products? Because we need to have some guidelines, and all of the data products within your organizations or across your group of organizations are going to roughly adhere to all of those. There will be one further computational governance, and that is actually at the data product level, where each data product will have their own rules that they apply to themselves and to their own data models, so that the team or the product team or the product person adheres to those rules, and they basically lay down those rules. Those rules would also form part of the documentation around that data product.
Sorry, Warren.
All right. Yeah.
You might have touched it, so apology if you really did, but if I just look at these principles, there's only one of them are really tech related, where all the others seems a little bit more business, governance, process related. I mean, data mesh is not a tech stack. It's not a is it a framework or a methodology really more than anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So data mesh. Let me backtrack a little bit, but yeah, data mesh is absolutely a methodology, right? And we were chatting about that a little bit earlier, and just saying that there's no set way to implement data mesh at the moment. There are recommendations, there are principles that we apply, but when we had these sort of very engaging group discussions at one of the recent tech conferences, what basically came to light is that there's no set pattern in how to implement a data mesh. What a lot of people agreed you can do is actually take certain principles and apply the ones that call out to you, and discard what doesn't really work for you. If you are going to apply the principles of data mesh, though, I would definitely recommend you at least adhere to the principles, and that's what we sort of try to go through here.
Okay.
So yeah. So we chatted a little bit earlier, the whole data mesh thing, and I'm going to run through this quite quick, but it was coined by a lady called Shomang Tangani. And what she spoke about here is data mesh being a decentralized social technical approach to share, access, and manage analytical data in complex, large-scale environments within or across your organizations. The social technical approach is probably the part that you're going to be quite interested in. Number one, it is decentralized, and that is in direct contrast with what Fabric is, which is centralized. But the social technical approach really is your balance between people, culture, collaboration, which is your social part, and then technology, architecture, which is your technical aspects. So basically, a lot of people also panic and they go, "Oh my God, as a data professional, I'm no longer going to have a job," because you're basically shifting the responsibility to sort of the team that's closest to the data. It's not really the case. All that's going to happen is we're going to allow the tech professionals to concentrate on the stack and make sure they provision a platform, and they're no longer the bottleneck in this whole sort of data movement. And probably a lot more collaboration with the data product owners who are going to be responsible for the data products. Does that answer your question?
Spot on. Thank you.
Fantastic. There is a great book by Jean-Marc as well, and it's really good. So if you get a chance, grab it, read about it. It goes into a lot of detail, and like literally what I'm talking about tonight is literally the first 2 chapters, and then it gets even more sort of involved. So the other 2 sort of challenges that we other 3-4 challenges that we're talking about is getting higher ordering value by interconnecting your data products, and we'll talk about how we connect those data products a little bit later. But that's where your federated computational governance answers your data as a product, so that we don't have these sort of siloed data products that don't speak to each other. How we're going to empower the actual domain teams, that's really going to be largely answered by your self-serve data platform, where users can actually, or citizen developers can actually serve the data to themselves. And then how do we reduce the cost of ownership as well from data as a product? And that's also then answered by your self-serve data platform. All right, cool. Now, when you implement some of these principles, you're going to see that certain shifts are going to happen within your organization. And these are really the shifts. So there's an organizational shift where you'll see we move from centralized ownership, which was our sort of traditional approach of IT or data, where a central data team looks after all the data, to a decentralized domain ownership. There's an architectural shift where we move from a monolithic sort of architecture into very much more a distributed architecture. So a concept that one of the people brought up to me, which I learned about not fairly recently, but a while ago, was data ops. So it's very much like DevOps for developer. Data ops is for us data professionals, and how do we sort of work with our data requests or our data products in a more agile manner, and that's really the distributed thing. There's going to be a technical shift where data used to be a byproduct of our code. Now what happens is our data and our code ship as one unit. We treat them as one unit. So your code is as important as your actual data. Operationally, there's going to be a shift from a top-down sort of governance into a federated computational governance, where each data product owner is actually going to have a key say in how the overall data mesh operates, but also how their data product operates. There's going to be a principal shift where we used to see data as an asset to collect, and we used to grab everything and just hold it tightly. And now what's happening is we actually we're looking at data as a product that's going to share and connect us. We're going to celebrate that data. I want people to be proud of that data. And then the infrastructural change is we're very much moving from a very fragmented sort of platform where there was analytical data, there's operational data, and now we're moving into an integrated platform where there's going to be a lot more communication between not only your various internally within your data teams that have to discuss these products and the best way to serve them, but also very much in an organizational perspective. There's actually a mind shift across the entire organization, and that's sort of those 6 shifts we'll see will start happening. And when you recognize they start happening, you can embrace it and actually say, well, that's almost by design that this would happen. One of the key fundamentals, though, is really data as a product, because that's what it's all about. And there's there's a couple of different fundamentals here within data as a product. So what are the various key values of data as a product being? And the first one is a data product has to be discoverable. So your end users need to be able to find it, and that speaks largely to the self-service side of things. So when you've got a data, when you provide the data product, like let's say as a catalog, whatever, they need to be able to find it and pick it up and use it. The data product also needs to be addressable, so it needs a fixed, permanent, and a unique address that is always going to be able to be found at this by the users or by your citizen developers. The data needs to be understandable, and this is, I think, if I can use the analogy of an iPhone, it's one of the few products in the world that ships without an instruction manual. It's intuitive. You want your data products to almost be intuitive so that people can understand it. When I talk about the understandable one, I'm going to jump down to the second last one, which is also independently valuable. When you look at a data product, you should be able to scrutinize the data product, and the data should be understandable to a point. You shouldn't have to link to other data. Yes, you are going to link to other data products at the end of the day to enhance your data, but you shouldn't have to link to other data products to be able to understand your data. The data product should be understandable on its own. Okay, just jumping back up a little bit, back to the trustworthy and truthful side of things. So obviously this is a critical thing for your data. Is can I trust it? Do I trust it? And we've got this sort of concept at the moment of data being certified. Why do we need to certify our own data? Well, because it's been prepared by a centralized team that didn't really understand what they were doing at the time when they built it. So one of the part of being a data product owner is your data as a product will always be trustworthy trustworthy and truthful. If it's not, then we're clearly doing something very wrong. There's no need to certify data because you're not going to have uncertified data sets as a data product. It simply wouldn't exist. Is it natively accessible? And when we say natively accessible, I'm not talking about native to your central IT team. I'm talking about native to your end user. So what do my end users use? And obviously that could be very different because a data scientist wants a data lake endpoint that you can use sort of PassBox to interrogate the data. A more traditional sort of data engineer might want a SQL endpoint that he can access that data from. A programmer might want to see it via an API. So it all depends on what your sort of end users need, and the data product owner would have a much better understanding of who the end users are versus a centralized data team. Interoperable. I've actually completely forgotten. Let's jump past that one. I'll come back to that one of what the interoperable component was. It's just slipped my mind now. I was trying to think back now. Independently variable we've spoken about, and then the last point was it needs to be secure. So and I think as IT professionals, security should be on our minds all the time with whatever we're doing and at whatever level we're doing. Now the beautiful part of doing this within the Fabric environment is that your security is handled by your AD credentials, and it's within the scope, and everything is basically seamlessly integrated. There's not even a need to stitch anything together like we used to have to do. So I'm not saying security is, you would still have to determine or have your security controlled. It would probably be done at your federated computational governance level, but definitely keep in mind that it needs to be handled from there. So
sorry, Warren, just a question, just on the previous slide. So there was a good point raising the capabilities within Fabric already. So, excuse me, if you think about things like certification and promotion of data sets, right, or artifacts in Fabric, that's already available, right? If you think about lineage, it almost feels like Purview is the answer there on the documentation and the dictionary side of things, but it sits outside of your capacity. You still, I mean, wouldn't it make more sense to just have Purview plugged in as part of your capacity instead of having to pay for it, additionally on top of your Fabric SKU?
I think it definitely would, Niku. And that's probably a great point for a Microsoft representative to look at. One of the things that we discussed earlier was a great way to sort of bring in a lot of your documentation, and that especially like the way things are going nowadays with a lot of people using PassBox, and that is using your PassBox notebooks. And it's based on the Jupyter notebook where you've got your markdown code and your actual result sets if you want. And it's a great way to sort of interrogate your data that, with every sort of data product, you could give and I mean, you can even use notebooks now in SQL, but you could give an actual notebook and they would have examples of how to draw the data out, for example. But yeah. Purview. Look, I haven't used Purview myself personally, but I do understand what the principles are behind it. But yeah, definitely that documentation and having some form of catalog like structure would assist you in ultimately answering those questions of what are the various elements or what makes up my data products.
Great, thanks, Warren.
No, it's cool, 100%. I'm just looking to see if I can find that interoperable definition. Sorry, that is completely lost my. There we go. In a second. Interoperable. So one of the main concerns in distributed data architecture is the ability to correlate cross data domains and stitch them together. Okay. So it's basically the domains talking to each other. So how do we actually have different data products speaking to each other? And we're gonna do that by use of something that we call well, it's going to be keys that are going to join to various nodes. And when we go into the actual architecture, I'll show you an example of it. Yeah, apologies. I was going to build out a little bit of a Power BI report, but I went off sick earlier this week, and then I only got a power source today from Takealite because I didn't want to go back into the office. So I haven't quite finished all of that, but I've got a very good example of that. And how I can almost liken it to is if I could visualize it, when you're in Power BI and you're modeling and you've got a couple of tables that you want to join, you almost think of your data products as those various tables and the nodes as the keys that you're joining together, and that's how the sort of data products speak to each other. But that's at a very much sort of a very simplistic explanation of it. So how do we actually implement or integrate a Medallion workspace into the Fabric architecture? And look, this is not just for data mesh. This is, you could use this across the board, and really everyone, I'm assuming everyone here knows the basic Medallion architecture of your gold, which is your enriched layer, and that's what you're going to use to present to your end users. You've got a validated layer, which is your silver layer, and then your raw layer, which is your bronze. And I've heard of other people having a platinum layer and a super platinum layer and an iron layer. I don't want to try overcomplicate it too much, but if that works for you, that works for you. I just find that this methodology works very well. We want to apply the KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid. And what you can actually do at that level, and I know these two are swapped around. On the left-hand side, my bronze is at the top, and on the right-hand side, my bronze is actually at the bottom, just to show you the basic sort of structure of it in the data flow. But you could essentially the models that we're using at the moment, when we do a bronze layer, we basically use one bronze layer for all three workspaces. There's no real need to have a dev test and prod bronze layer, unless obviously you wanted to test data without actually bringing it into your model. But what you can do obviously is sorry, the word I'm looking for, the word to sort of bring up, to promote data to the next layer, or to promote code to the next layer. You would use your deployment pipelines in Fabric to actually push those across to the next, from your dev to your test to your prod, and obviously your source control would happen all in your dev workspace. Like Nick said earlier, we've got that fantastic feature now where you're actually going to bring your service account. The service accounts are now in your source control Git, which is fantastic. And that's the nice thing is when we started using Fabric, there were all these little pitfalls and shortfalls that then you couldn't do something in a pipeline, and you have to use an API call to go back to old data factory and do that pipeline there. All of that sort of being worked out, and like we said, it's still Fabric is very much in its infancy level, but it's growing. The cadence that we're getting new features and releases and just really cool stuff is just phenomenal. The amount of effort that Microsoft is putting into this is not going away anytime soon. It's just going to get better and better. And I can see that a lot of Databricks and Snowflake guys are starting to get a little bit nervous, which is great. I'm happy because
Sorry, Ron, just a quick question, because the first thing I saw you was the fact that you only have one bronze layer there. I just want to maybe get your and the rest of the guys' feeling. I see on our side, there's very, very few environments that actually, from a data perspective, that we source from, that's got more than one environment. So, I mean, in the old on-prem days, you always had a dev and a UAT and a production, or whatever the case. But these days, it's almost not. It's the exception rather than the rule. Do you guys experience the same thing, or is it just unluckily the guys that I've worked with? Like APIs, there's no dev APIs ever. There's only production APIs.
Really? Okay, so I guess it really depends on your clients and maybe the sort of governance at their infrastructure level. I found that people are finding better and smarter ways to do things. Like for instance, with the APIs, I think it was called just there was an API interface the other day that I saw, which is basically like a self-test API space, and it was I just need to remember the name of it, but it was like amazing and like so I think people are getting a lot smarter with these kind of things.
Okay.
But I think ultimately your dev test and prod is really, dev should be where we're building and changing code and all of that.
Yeah.
And then we should never, well, in my mind, we should never really be fiddling with code in your test workspace or your prod workspace. That should be the only way to get that there is via promotion of a deployment pipeline. So that shouldn't be edited at all. Test is a great space for your users or your super users at least to come in and just check that everything works the way that they wanted it to. Maybe now with the sort of with the data mesh methodology, they are the ones that are sort of driving the development, so they might be a little bit more hands-on and less like it comes as a surprise when all of a sudden this thing lands in test and they're like, oh, that's actually not what I wanted. And then your prod workspace absolutely is your sort of client facing. But so this is known as the 7 workspace architecture. There's some very good videos on YouTube, in fact, about this. If you want to look at just how to do it, to show you basically how it would to visualize it inside your Fabric workspace. You see here single bronze, multiple gold, and multiple silver workspaces, one for each. One thing that I find here is really your naming convention is quite important. Because you want everything to order nicely the way it is and like sort of flow in that mannerism. So I would say find a naming convention, and it doesn't really matter, but whatever you do, just keep it uniform and stick to it. And that would be something that your federated computational guys or your computational governance team would actually then agree on. I'm just going to jump out of here quickly. I'm going to show you guys an example. I am keeping time in mind as well. Sorry, this quickly. There we go. Okay, can you guys see my screen? You should be seeing a drawer diagram there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right, fantastic. So this is basically an architectural diagram of a hypothetical data mesh environment here. And what's essentially happening is the data is going to be flowing really from a sort of the left-hand side across your workspaces. So on the first sort of swim lane is our on-premises and our clouds data sources. We bring that into Fabric via your sort of connections, gateways, and shortcuts, either via your on-premises data gateway or via shortcuts. So obviously, because it's native cloud, it's great. We prefer that. And then essentially it's going to come into our actual Fabric capacity, which is this large block over here. And inside our Fabric capacity, we've got our 3 swim lanes. So the first one is our dev workspace, second one is our test workspace, and the third one is our prod workspace or prod workspaces. Sorry, I'm just grouping them together like that. If we take a look from this point of view, inside each workspace, we've got obviously our raw, which the raw serves its purpose for both the test workspace and the test workspaces and the prod workspaces. And our source control would also be at our dev level. Using our deployment pipelines, we would then deploy that code across once we're happy. So it's going to be continuous, what did they say? CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. I prefer deploy at, what did they say? Deploy at will or deploy at your leisure kind of thing. But that data then would come through to your validator side, and then ultimately that data would come through to your test workspaces, and then ultimately it would flow into your prod workspace. You'll see from this point over here, even though you can and you probably should have a Power BI environment within or bolted to your Fabric side, and you've got one for dev or at least definitely for test and for prod. our our end users, which is our users, our groups, our subscriptions, and our external users, will only ever actually, you'll see it only ever touches our prod workspace here. So they actually technically don't really have any access to our dev and our test. We'd only give specific access to the users that we need to have that data, because obviously that's not production quality, let's say. The other thing that you'll see here is there's a data quality arrow over there saying that the data quality increases as we go closer and closer or higher up, ultimately reaching our users. So that there should be exceptional data quality over here. And that's really just what the Medallion architecture really lends itself to. Which is what we ultimately want is great quality there. You also see that we've got a support and infrastructure swim lane, because that data is coming in from the left and sort of moving up. There's this support across the board from the bottom all the way to the top, and obviously they would span not only the data product teams or the data product owners, but also then on the left-hand side, you can see here. So for example, Microsoft would be responsible for the Fabric tech stack, and the support that they provide with that software as a service. The company, okay, so I've just put my company logo in here, would be responsible for obviously providing the solution that we've built, all the code in there. And then the actual company themselves would also be providing support internally for their tech stack, for their access, creating user groups, all of that sort of story, and security. Definitely, there is a data governance level here, and you could use either you do your data governance yourself, or you use something like Purview to actually control it on your side. The thing that this diagram doesn't answer is obviously how we're actually using the methodology of the data mesh here. And to do it in this diagram would be quite difficult because we just can't go into that much detail here. But here is an example of an actual individual proposed workspace. So what you'll see is the outside block is basically our workspace. Inside, and obviously this is within Microsoft Fabric, everything's really separated by Chinese walls, but it is a unified solution still. What we'll do is we'll actually break it up into domains, and your domains really should be defined by, if you look at your organizational structure, that's going to help you identify what your domains actually should be. Now, each domain can have one or more data products. So if you think about, let's say, for example, if we were in a banking space and I had a domain which was core banking, my core banking domain might have two data products, and one data product might be credit cards and the other data product might be savings accounts. Now, within those data products, what would happen is there'd be various nodes, and you can almost think of the nodes as like sort of a table with kind of common common data points, and that's what those nodes are really. So let's think about something like customer account number or internal customer account number. And yes, you might need to map it at some point, but what would happen is, even though these are all autonomous, we spoke about the interoperability just now. So my customer account number in the credit card would speak to the same customer account number within the savings account, which would speak to the same customer account number, or maybe through a mapping table inside the ERP or the customer relations or customer services data product. So you can sort of see how all of these data products can be completely interoperable. Each one has also got its own lifespan. New data products can be added and old data products can be retired, but ultimately your entire solution should still be running seamlessly, and your speed of change is a lot faster running it with a data mesh logic than it would have been running it through a centralized IT team. So yeah, basically, so just to wrap up, that essentially is how we're trying to marry these three unique concepts, which is Fabric as a unified service, data mesh as a sort of a decentralized social technical approach, and Medallion architecture as a way to organize within a fabric. So workspaces are going to be your absolute best friends in terms of trying tools, and you can really structure it however you want. Each organization is going to be different. Each organization's data requirements are going to be completely different as well. And I think that's basically, yeah, that's trying to sell you guys or trying to explain you guys a concept, and that's really just touching on the first 2 chapters of the book. But I found it incredibly interesting so far. It's been quite a unique journey.
Yeah.
No, this is great. It's opened up other ideas just having listened to this the second time around. I think what's great for me is thanks a lot, Warren. The data
No
mesh
problem, Nico.
technology, like you say, it depends, right? You're gonna have to use it what works for you in your organization. But I think the Medallion architecture is solid, so it gives you that pattern, repeatable process, and things like shortcuts for raw, right? That's just basically a pointer or with a bookmark to where the data lives within one lake. So it opens up so many options and I guess different ways to skin that cat. So no, thanks a lot. It was a great session.
Awesome. No, thank you very much for having me, Nico. And yeah, I definitely look forward to speaking for you guys again.